In this video, I'm going to react to the day that the world almost ended. Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. This is the place where I react to music, media, sports, anime, anything related to popular culture. I'll watch it with an open mind and give you my 100% honest reaction to it. And if you could please hit that like button early, I'd really appreciate it. Now, this should be genuinely fascinating because just based on conjecture and me guessing, I would imagine this has something to do with a potential nuclear war being started. Potentially around the time of the Cold War, maybe. Yeah, that's all I can really guess about this. But, just to imagine, because based on the damage that the two nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I believe 150,000 people died directly as a result of the nuclear bombs. But then countless more, in terms of the radiation, and all of the after effects. So, and that was only two bombs. We've got thousands and thousands on this planet. So, I mean, if a nuclear war broke out, an all-out nuclear war, it would probably mean the extinction of the human race. So, I'm grateful that this didn't happen, but I'm intrigued to find out, what this video is about. So let's go. This is going to be me reacting to the day that the world almost ended. Let's do it.
This video was made possible by Skillshare. Learn anything with Skillshare for free for 2 months by being one of the first 500 people to sign up using the link below. October 27th, 1962 is the most important date in human history that nobody really knows about. It was the day that human civilization came the closest that it's ever been to being totally annihilated.
Wow.
If events had gone slightly differently that day, or one man had made a different decision, it's very likely that you would never have existed in the first place. And even if you did, the world you know today in 2019 would more closely resemble Fallout than our own.
Wow.
Because on October 27th, 1962, the world came the closest it's ever been to full-out nuclear war. The circumstances that almost led to disaster began 3 years previously in 1959, when the previous government of Cuba was overthrown by a new Marxist Communist Party that became the first country in the Western Hemisphere to openly ally with the Soviet Union. A communist country just 90 miles away from Florida was unacceptable to the US government at the time, and multiple attempts by the American government to assassinate Castro or overthrow his government, like the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, all failed.
The Bay of Pigs. I wonder what that's about. I'm gonna have to put a video of that on the list. Sounds pretty interesting.
The American-sponsored but half-hearted invasion at the Bay of Pigs convinced Castro that the Americans were going to try and launch a full-scale invasion of Cuba at some point in the future. And so Castro was getting closer and closer in his alliance with the USSR. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, was concerned not only with the possibility of an American invasion of Cuba, but also with the recent deployments of American nuclear missiles in Italy, and more alarmingly to them, in Turkey. The missiles here were within striking distance of Ukraine and southern Russia itself, and America possessed 170 ICBMs on the American mainland capable of striking anywhere inside of the USSR. The Soviets, at the same time, only possessed a few dozen ICBMs, and besides that, they had no possible ability to strike the US mainland itself.
But the thing is, even though the Soviet Union only had a few dozen ICBMs, the destructive power of each of those is probably vast, vast. Assuming each one can, cause 250,000 fatalities, you times that by 30, you're looking at that's tens of millions of people, It's a lot.
The solution to balance out this disparity in attack capability in the eyes of the Soviets was obvious. They had thousands of medium and short-range nuclear missiles that couldn't hit the US from anywhere inside of the Soviet Union. So, why not begin putting these missiles in the territory of their new allies in Cuba that could then threaten to strike pretty much anywhere inside of America, just like the Americans had done by placing their missiles in Turkey. The problem was, the Soviets weren't sure how the Americans would react to nuclear missiles 90 miles away from their coast. So they began
They wouldn't be happy. Like, who would be, you know, especially like considering how close they are to you. You know, you would have such little time to react as soon as they're in the air. Ugh.
and moving them in absolute secrecy starting in September 1962. It was the start of the most dangerous gamble that humanity has ever played, with the entire fate of the world literally at stake.
Jeez.
And for the first time in America's history, she faced the same threat that nearly every other country in the world has faced for centuries: the very real threat of total annihilation by an external power. The first photographic evidence of Soviet missiles by American spy planes flying over Cuba was acquired on October 14th. President Kennedy was notified on October 16th when he called a meeting to discuss the American response options. They included doing nothing, using diplomacy to pressure the Soviets to withdraw, threatening Castro with an invasion, blockading Cuba to prevent any new missiles from arriving, using airstrikes to destroy the known missile site locations, or using the US military to launch a full-scale invasion of Cuba to destroy the missile sites and overthrow Castro and his regime. The American Joint Chiefs of Staff were unanimous in their approval of the invasion option, but only Kennedy disagreed. Unknown to them, Castro himself was convinced that America was planning on invading and urged the Soviets to fire a preemptive nuclear strike on American cities in preparation for it.
Wow, so this guy really wanted to see all-out war. How do you... a preemptive nuclear strike? Oh my God. I mean, that's not something that you should do preemptively. I mean, firing a nuclear weapon should be the absolute last resort. Last resort.
Soviet leader Khrushchev hesitated on his side, while Kennedy hesitated on his own side. Imagine how different the course of events may have been with any other world leaders who might have more easily fallen into peer pressure, but neither Kennedy nor Khrushchev did, although both prepared for war. Kennedy authorized a limited blockade of Cuba on October 22nd that was stopping any ship traveling suspected of carrying weapons. Khrushchev announced that the Soviets would be ignoring this blockade, and for the first time in US history, the nuclear alert system was raised to DEFCON 2, just one step before all-out nuclear war would be declared. And for the only time in US history, nuclear bombers went on continuous 24-hour alert with several orbiting the USSR itself, ready to drop the nukes on a 15-minute notice. 145 American ICBMs were armed and made ready to launch, with several aimed directly at Cuba. On October 25th, the Soviets began challenging the US blockade and even getting a few ships slipped past. On October 26th, the US began making full preparations to invade Cuba, while on the same day, Castro continued to urge the Soviets in a telegram to launch the nuclear first strike against America. And then, finally, in this atmosphere of extreme tension, the day of October 27th came that decided the fate of the entire world right up until our current time. A Soviet submarine flotilla had managed to slip past the blockade of Cuba undetected sometime previously, but on October 27th, one of these subs, B-59, was discovered by the Americans. A squad of 11 American destroyers and one aircraft carrier pursued the Soviet sub and it dived further underwater. In order to signal they wanted the submarine to resurface and positively identify itself as a part of the blockade, one of the American destroyers began dropping practice dummy depth charges on B-59. These couldn't possibly hurt the submarine because they were just dummies, but
it sends a message. It sends a clear message.
Soviet crew on board didn't know that. They assumed that the charges were real, and since they had lost contact with Moscow several days previously, most of them assumed that war may have already started back above the surface. Their submarine was armed with a T-5 torpedo tipped with a 5-kiloton nuclear warhead. If war had truly begun back above the surface like they believed, and the nukes had already been fired, then it wouldn't matter if they fired their nuclear torpedo against the American ships that seemed to be attacking them. There were 3 officers on board that all had to agree on deploying a nuclear weapon, and while 2 of them did agree, the third, named Vasily Arkhipov, was the sole man who disagreed.
Thank you, that man. Thanks, Vasily. Man, can you imagine that? We would have been living in like a zombie wasteland if not for this man, potentially. Whew.
Arkhipov was the commander of the whole Soviet submarine flotilla, and he just happened to choose by chance to be aboard B-59. Usually, the deployment of a nuclear weapon on a Soviet submarine only required the authorization of the 2 most senior-ranking commanders on board, the captain and the political officer. Had Arkhipov not been present, these 2 who were in favor of the nuclear option would have had their way and it would have been fired. The presence of Arkhipov on board by mere chance meant that his approval was also required though, and he stood alone and disagreed against the peer pressure of his fellow officers. Eventually they relented, and desperate for air after being underwater for so long, they resurfaced and returned back to the Soviet Union. But had things gone differently? If Arkhipov made a different decision, whether he fell into peer pressure or if he simply chose a different submarine to be present on, you probably wouldn't exist, and neither would the internet or probably anything else that you know. That 5-kiloton torpedo was about 1/3 the power of the Hiroshima bomb, and it probably would have destroyed most of that American naval squadron, killing thousands of American sailors and destroying a dozen ships, including an aircraft carrier. Under the tense atmosphere that was already present, it's believable to assume that the Americans would have responded by launching a nuclear strike of their own against Cuba and maybe even the USSR, leading down the path to apocalypse and an early, real-life version of Fallout. So remember to thank Vasily Arkhipov for unknowingly saving your life and our world 57 years ago.
Absolutely.
Don't take another day afterwards for granted. To make the most out of the time that you have, it's nice to do something productive or learn a new set of skills. Organization and decision-making in crises like the Cuban Missile Crisis saved millions of lives. And while the course offered by my friend Thomas Frank on Skillshare—
Oh my goodness, I mean, just talk about, one man having the fate of the entire world in his hands. I mean, just absolutely great decision from Vasily. Great doesn't even properly describe the magnitude of it. Just, crazy. We were that close to just all-out nuclear war. I mean, just imagine what that would look like, just probably couldn't go outside. Like the population would be massively lower than what it is now. Massively lower if we existed at all. Probably couldn't go outside because of the toxic gases in the air, the radiation. Everyone's living in bunkers. You probably couldn't grow anything anywhere. So living on some kind of synthetic food, it just wouldn't be a pleasant place to live. Man, thanks Vasily for what you did. I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, turn on bell notifications, and keep throwing the recommendations my way. I know I say it all the time, but they genuinely help me out, because if I know you enjoyed watching something, I'll definitely enjoy reacting to it. So like, subscribe, turn on bell notifications, keep throwing the recommendations, and I'll catch you in the next one.